one she gave, but good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it may be when you guys are tuning in. You guys have no clue what's going on back behind the scenes. So that's why y'all don't know why we're silly, but that's all right. We are here with another episode of Toneal Talks Politics. I am the host, Toneal Jackson, and joining me again, as always, our fellow Green Party members, David Rich. Christian came back. He liked our crazy, so he is back again. And we have Joe, who is joining us for the first time this week. And so I am going to yield the floor and allow each of these gentlemen to introduce themselves a little bit, and we'll start in that order. So David, then Christian, then Joe, and then we're going to jump right into this week's topic of decentralization. Go ahead, David.
All right, my name is David Rich. Thanks for having me back. Having a great time here. I'm a member of the Green Party, recently converted from the Libertarian Party to the Green Party. Told the story before. I just basically found the platforms of the Green Party to be 100% completely and totally comprehensively acceptable. So I made the switch. That's the sum. That's the brief part.
Okay. Go ahead, Christian.
Fair enough. Keep it really brief. I was on here last week. My name's Christian, 29. As I pointed out last week, I play guitar. Other side. Still got to get this right. You know, whatever's happening here. I joined the Green Party back in November or December. I don't honestly know. Little short history into that. 2016's election really threw me for a loop. Hated to see Donald Trump get elected and what he did to the country in the 4 years he had it. And I realized that, well, politics is important and I should be involved. So I joined the Green Party, literally top down. You name the 10 key values. I agree with each and every one of them. So we're in it. We're ready to win it. And yeah, we're good to go. We're ready to rock. Let's get with it.
Sounds awesome, and welcome back. All right, Joe, so you are the newcomer to the panel. Tell us a little bit about yourself, as well as how long you have been a Green Party member and what made you want to become Green.
So my name is Joe Kopsick. I'm 33. I live in Waukegan, raised in Lake Bluff. I've been a Green Party member since sometime in the middle of last year, and I made the switch from being a Libertarian Party member to being a Green. I was a Libertarian Party member for about 4 years after identifying with the movement for about 10 or 15 years. And I realized that the Green Party and the Libertarian Party, what they have in common is that they both like nonviolence and decentralization. And that's why it's really important that these two parties share ideas. And that's why I've followed, David and I come into the Libertarian Party after we actually ran against each other for U.S. House. And I ran 3 times prior to that, usually as an independent.
Well, we are so glad that now we're able to be united under this wonderful green umbrella. So welcome again, Joe, to you. And as you guys have mentioned, this week we're going to be talking about decentralization. But before we jump into that, just to let everyone who this might be your first time watching, understand that you are in the middle of a phenomenal 10-week series where we are breaking down every single week the Green Party values. So on week 1, we discussed grassroots democracy. Week 2, we discussed social justice. Week 3, we talked about, what did we talk about? Oh, ecological wisdom. Week 4, we talked about nonviolence. And so now we are back again this week to talk about decentralization. And so there are some phenomenal values in which the Green Party is built upon. And as you have heard just from today's panel alone, regardless of what your belief systems are, there's something here for everybody within the Green Party. So we have been able to convert Democrats and Libertarians and all of those people to bring them under this phenomenal umbrella. And so in either case, we're going to jump into it. If you are watching it live, feel free to throw your questions in the comment section below, and we will definitely try to get to them. But we also want you to remember that if you are not a member of the Green Party officially and you would like to become a member, please feel free to join us. Go to our website, www.ilgp.org. That's www.ilgp.org. Also, if you have any questions, you can send an email to info@ilgp.org. ILGP.org. And we'll be talking about other events and things like that, giving you other opportunities to get involved. But let's start out talking about decentralization. And so Joe said that that's something that he's really into. So Joe, we're going to start the questions off with you. When you hear the term decentralization, what comes to mind?
Well, I mean, the first thing I think of is states' rights, and that's obviously got a negative connotation. But to me, the 10th Amendment is not just a states' rights amendment. It says that the powers reserved to the federal government, the powers not reserved to the federal government are reserved to the states or the people. Now, it doesn't say anything about the order, like it doesn't say the state takes precedence over the people. What it's implying is that the people and their state governments can negotiate how much they want to regulate that industry or whatever topic they're talking about. And so we have to consider different types of federalization and different types of federalism, dual federalism, cooperative federalism, as a way to prevent the central government, the national government, from becoming overburdened. See, if it tries to do too much and it fails or it spends too much money, we have to rein in some of that power. And that doesn't mean empowering corrupt state governments, but it could mean, for the Green Party, it should mean empowering county and local governments, maybe coming up with new, different forms of local governments that we haven't tried yet to replace the states or something. There's an idea called bioregionalism you can look up. I don't want to get too far into that. But yeah, there needs to be a way for the federal government, the state government, and the local governments to each do their own thing so that they don't step on each other's feet. And we have a conflict of interest between local and less local, police, for example.
Awesome. Now I saw as you were talking, Christian and David both kind of bopping along. So I'm taking that's a little bit meaning that we're in agreement. So Christian, why don't you go ahead and just add on as you see fit. When you think about decentralization, what comes to mind?
So, excuse me. When I think typically of decentralization, the first thing that came to mind was spreading the wealth. And just in the idea that Toneal, you should have, if we were all a form of government or a form of, I guess, government, Toneal, you should have a say. Joe should have a say. Dave should have a say. I'm going to get this thing down eventually. But I think it means spread the wealth in terms of everyone should have a say in what happens. Right now, I think it also came to mind the federal versus the state level of things. Federal being like a centralized, unite the country. We're under one government. States kind of do their own things, though. If you look, probably one of the more prominent things that are happening right now, marijuana laws. Federal still has the ban on it, but statewise, Illinois is obviously a legal state. California being a legal state. There's 14 others there that also have it as a legal state. I'm sorry?
I think 17, but go ahead.
17? Okay. So just that kind of thing where, like Joe was pointing out, the difference in ideology or the difference in policy where it's illegal on the federal level, but on the state level here especially, it's legal. So that kind of spread the wealth thing came to me as being what decentralization means, where everyone should kind of have a say. Ultimately, when I was asked to do this last week and kind of learn about it, I didn't know a lot about decentralization. I didn't understand a lot of it. So through research and that kind of thing, that's kind of just what came to mind. Just kind of spreading the wealth and making sure that everybody has a say. It kind of prevents one person or one group of people from having too much power because there's so many ideologies out there and so many different viewpoints. And maybe if those viewpoints can all work together, we could all have a more evenly distributed and rights for all kind of government that would really work for everybody.
Awesome. Come on, David, chime in.
Okay. So the way I see it is like I approach decentralization in two different aspects. One is systemic and the other one is moral. The systemic issue is when I was studying going through my master's curriculum in system science, one of the, I don't know what you call it, sayings, adages, proverbs, whatever, was that a sufficiently complex system tends to be more efficient when it is decentralized. It's true in nature. It's definitely true of people. There are some areas of nature that have they're massively complex systems with centralized power units, if you will. But nature has an infinite amount of power. People don't. The reason being that why it's more efficient when it's decentralized, if it's sufficiently complex, is because there's just too many variables to control. And if the variables are constantly changing, then the configurations between all the variables are constantly changing. And you're talking about an exponentially large amount of changes over a very small duration of time. Okay, so to have one little itty bitty centralized power try to control all of that is absurd. And most likely it's going to collapse, it's going to fail. That's the systemic reason. The moral reason is that we are all born, I'm going to go right back to morality, Toneal. Okay, you know, I'm a big fan of it. I said we were all born with our own CPU, our own central processing unit. It's called human reason. And human reason will tell you what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, what is true, and what is false. Okay, and then we have willpower in order to act on those proper conclusions. So in the moral sense, we don't need a centralized power out there telling us how to behave, what's right, what's wrong. We might need local centralized power, but that's fine because those are smaller systems. And sometimes things go wrong and we need some sort of centralized something to help us kind of work out the how we're going to relate to one another in a community, how to build houses, how to build roads, where we're going to get water from, stuff like that. So those are my two vantage points on decentralization, systemic and moral.
Well, awesome. And Molly is watching, and she just kind of threw out there equality, trying to pretty much like level the playing field, so to speak. We need to get some balance in there. And so just thinking about that and thinking about decentralization as it pertains to the Green Party, I want to kind of talk to both of our former libertarians right now. So both Joe and David, what do you guys see as being the difference with how the Green Party looks at or treats decentralization versus the Libertarian Party? Is there a difference? And if so, what is that difference? And we can start with Joe.
I think the libertarians tend towards like the traditional constitutionalist sort of 10th Amendment states' rights interpretation. That is like, we already have working state governments, why not use them to decentralize? So it's like, well, I think the Greens are more likely to recognize that they're corrupt. So yeah, I mean, I haven't talked to too many people in the Greens about exactly how to do decentralization, but like, it's a topic I've been talking about for a long time, and there's a lot of different types out there. Not only different political types, but as we've gone over, there's, you know, moral decentralization of wealth and production and finance, economics and trade, and but yeah, and I mean, in terms of the party structure, like the Green Party, state parties, they're kind of a little more loosely connected and affiliated with each other, and more likely to be independent or, you know, for example, disagree with the nomination than the libertarians. But yeah, the Green Party is still something that's trying to become a, you know, national party. But of course, we're not going to try to make it too decent or too centralized. It's going to remain centralized in the hands of, you know, the states are going to run their own caucuses and things like that.
Okay, David.
In my experience, from my recollection of my experiences talking to libertarians about decentralization, it's very similar, I think. I mean, I think Joe's definitely right. You had a lot of states' rights guys and girls in the Libertarian Party too. So like, that was the extent of their idea of decentralization. But usually when I would bring up the idea of super local communities controlling themselves, almost all of them were like, well, yeah, sure, okay. You know, if we're going to even bring it down to a smaller level, we should do that too. I think they're just making a more practical move because we have states' rights already established in the Constitution. We can work on expanding them and that kind of thing. The structure, the political structure for dealing with that sort of decentralization is already present. Whereas, like, you know, getting rid of states and just letting all local communities do their own thing, there's no political template for that right now. They would call that anarchy. But I think generally speaking, they meant the same thing. Smaller is better.
Well, now I'm going to ask Christian a question. So Christian, you said, and you kind of sound like me, you were like, hey, I don't really know. I didn't know what decentralization was. So I had to go and do some research. So what I wanted to do first, I am going to read the dictionary's definition of decentralization. And then, Christian, what I'm going to ask you is, what did you find to be the most fascinating aspect of decentralization? So the dictionary, for those of you who may not know what this fancy word is, it simply means the transfer of control of an activity or organization to several local offices or authorities rather than one single one, right? So that's the working definition that we will use for today. Now, we know that Joe kind of brought in, and we're going to talk on that, the different types of, right? So it is moral, political, whatever. So we'll delve into that a little bit later. But Christian, what did you find to be the most interesting aspect upon your research?
Well, when doing my research, I read the definition, and I actually have it written down right here, believe it or not. What stuck out to me and what fascinated me is the idea of how I brought up spread the wealth, and the idea that decentralization really focuses on not having this big grand entity as the governing rule of life. Whereas like your federal versus state level, or even lower than that, it really just fascinated me that the idea that we could spread the wealth, that we could work in smaller groups, whether that be counties or cities or state level versus federal level, to tailor things to your community. So even down to the city level or the county level, if we could kind of have things have like I guess the counties have more power in terms of what they do, and not necessarily they have to listen to complete state control. So like if you looked at Illinois and you looked at the map of Illinois, we are a Democratic state. However, a lot of counties outside of Chicago, out of Cook County, really are very Republican or very conservative or right leaning. So I think in terms of like freedom and choices you want to make and places you want to live, if we could spread that wealth in terms of like, well, Cook County wants to be primarily blue. Cook County could abide by more rules that are in place for people that are left leaning, I guess. And outside like Southern Illinois and Western Illinois, you have people that are more conservative, and maybe they can follow some values that follow conservatism as opposed to democratic ideals. So that idea kind of stuck out to me, and that was one of the pros. It's confusing in my head as to how it would work, because it would be a lot of stuff would have to happen for that to work. But that's kind of where my mind went when I thought decentralization, and I thought, well, this is interesting. This could be something that could work.
Awesome. So now I kind of want to shift it where we're talking about the different types, right? But before we go into that, for those of you who are just tuning in, we are in the midst of week 5, where we are discussing the different key core values of the Green Party. And this week's element, or this week's key, is decentralization. And so we've been talking about that. If you guys are interested and you want to know more about the Green Party itself, then we invite you to go to our website, which is www.ilgp.org. We also invite you to send any questions that you may have about the Green Party to info@ilgp.org. And for any upcoming events that we have, again, you're going to keep on hearing me say this website, www.ilgp.org/events. And you can go to that same website if you would like to volunteer, but you just hit /volunteer. So now I want to start with David, Mr. Morality. And we were talking about that there is a moral decentralization, right? So in an ideal world, what does that look like to you?
Oh, what does it look like if decentralization means something merely moral? Well, that means 100% decentralization. That means no local towns, it means everybody knows the right thing to do all the time. You said ideal.
Yeah, that's like, you remember what last week when we were talking about nonviolence. So that's like in its purest form then, right? So when everybody is just because it's the right thing to do, they're just going to do it. Oh, okay. So what is a realistic? Because that part won't happen.
realistic approach is that most people are doing the best they can most of the time. It's the rest of the scale that sometimes we do stupid things or bad things. And I'm still convinced as a philosopher that the root of all problems is ignorance. That, if you really truly knew, and I'm talking about like a really felt understanding of what the right thing was to do, you would do that because that's the right thing to do. That's not always easy to get to. There's genetic issues, there's upbringing problems, there's community problems, getting involved with the bad crowd problems, drugs, whatever. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But I still think that by definition, a person has that ability to reason. And if you can just focus on that, there's a bajillion different methods of reasoning, from critical thinking to logic to mathematics and the scientific method. It's all out there. People are working on this stuff and advancing these things all the time. And I think if you study something as simple as critical thinking, if people studied the fallacies, just fallacies in reasoning, there's hundreds of them. Pick like the top 25 most committed fallacies and just put those into your head. And I guarantee you it's going to change the way you walk around and approach the world, because you're going to listen to somebody be like, oh, no, that's begging the question. You can't do that. And here's why. Oh, no, that's a straw man argument. Let me tell you what you just did here. And you can rectify the reasoning process as you're going along. And hopefully you can get to similar or the same conclusions as other people about how to behave in the world.
Well,
that's the more real.
Yeah, we have to educate some folks, because that's the only way that's really going to happen.
The critical thinking isn't taught at a younger level. It's usually you don't even get into college. It's not that hard. You can teach kids. I'm not saying you got to use big, post hoc ergo proctor hoc. I mean, you can change the words. I mean, that's one Latin phrase for it's a causal problem in your argument. You don't have to be that pretentious about it, but you can reduce these things down to simple phrases, phraseologies, and ways of understanding. I'm not saying you should start them in kindergarten, but probably 5th, 6th, 7th grade. People are old enough to understand logic, for sure.
Well, we have to pray about that, because we have some adults who do some very illogical things. My mother used to always say sense is not common for everybody. So you cannot just always say use common sense, because from where we're deriving that sense may be very different. But I want to hit Joe. Joe, we want to get you to start talking a little bit more. You were saying that you love this topic of decentralization. Tell us a little bit about why it moves you so much, and then start talking about like one element that you're really passionate about as it pertains to this topic.
Well, one thing I should start off with is just since we're talking about, the decentralization of morality, one really important technology that allowed morality to become decentralized away from the church was the printing press. It's like the early version of the internet. So it's because of that we're all allowed to talk to each other now without speaking in Latin and checking with the church first. So we have to take that idea and apply it to the government. And there's three main ways, there's legislative, executive, and judicial. Those are the three branches. And that gives us the three different ways to decentralize law. One is to decentralize enforcement to the most local, place or area possible, have local police. Decentralize justiciable resolution of our problems. See, David is right. And, as a former / current libertarian, I do believe that we wouldn't need government if everyone were moral enough. But it's like, if you want to work with other people to voluntarily cooperate to fix problems, you're going to have to look for people in your local community, because they're right there. And like some things are going to inherently be local. Like for me, land issues and environment, it's like the land's right there. Why do we have a big federal land management bureaucracy? And then also, there's a decentralized legislation. So we have, county and local and state governments to make laws that we don't think should be in the hands of central government. There's so many different topics that, I don't even know what to get to next. But one thing that really piqued my interest in decentralization is, knowing about a couple of different types of federalism, and how right now we just talk about federalism as if it's like people don't even know what it is. People define it as the opposite of what it is. People think it means central control. Federalism actually means like duly delegated spheres of influence distributed and shared between the national and state governments. But, that might not necessarily be what the Green Party ends up with. I think what they're going to want is have the federal government kind of work closely with the state and local governments to craft standards, but have the federal government supervise the more local governments and make sure that they're applying those standards. But yeah, that's something we have to talk about and debate about. It's a pretty detailed thing. Could I just want to provide one definition of a term, subsidiarism. I think that's a really important term in helping us understand what decentralization is about, aside from like polycentrism. But subsidiarism is the delegation of power to the most local authority that's capable of competently exercising that authority. So we don't want to decentralize things so much that just every city, state, or whatever can do whatever it wants, because then you go from one town to another and all of a sudden there's just like a completely different set of laws and you're like, what the hell's going on here? We can't have that. We can't have that much difference. We have to be able to travel as wherever we want, but there has to be some kind of average, something keeping us together, something recognizable as the same society, and make sure the government's competent enough to enforce its order.
No, I totally agree with that, and let's pull that in and just discuss that for a moment, shall we? When you said that, like literally, I don't know why, but I instantly got a visual, right? Like if you could imagine with Chicago, we're broken down into like there's literally 77 neighborhoods in Chicago. Now the reality is that each neighborhood actually kind of abides by its own code, right? Like even if it's not law, you go into, say, if you go from Roseland to Inglewood to, I'm trying to you guys can just think about some of these other different neighborhoods, like you go to Austin and Lawndale and all of these different ones, Canaryville, I'm just trying to think of them. There kind of are innate codes with it. If you're in from that neighborhood, it's kind of it's self-governing, even though it technically has to answer to a larger body. But it was really, for me, I mean, like maybe not funny, haha, but for me when he said that, when Joe said that, like, because you imagine going from place to place and it's totally different, like you go into this store and these are the laws in this store, it becomes very confusing because it's like, what? I'm just gonna stay home, So in any case, Christian, go ahead and just kind of throw in some stuff and touch on that point that Joe made.
It's a very interesting point, and I agree with you, Toneal, that like that would be impossible. I would rather just stay home at that juncture. I would like to say, and Dave kind of hit it on the head there, in a perfect world, morality would prevail and people would have a moral compass. Unfortunately, I think all of us know at least one person in our lives that doesn't have that moral compass, that kind of just, whether it be their upbringing or whatever happened, they just for some reason lack that moral compass. I think that would go a long way in kind of making decentralization possible. I don't think in the current system that we have, this capitalist system, which I talked about last week, that it's possible. I really struggle with finding a way to make it work because it kind of it would work in theory, and that's what I'm really excited about with decentralization. In theory, you could make it work, just not in our current system. Our current system is like I talked about last week. I don't care about any of you. I only want what's for myself. That's what capitalism brings out in people. That's what capitalism breeds in people. That's what capitalism expects out of you, out of everybody else around you. It's me and mine, not us and ours. So I really think in order for decentralization to become better, more efficient, and just a better overall form of, in order to work, I guess, we would need A, morality. B, we'd have to kind of adjust the system that we're currently in, which is, I think, what Joe was touching on with the dual federalism and subsidiarism a little bit, because there does have to be an overarching central, like you can't go from down the street to down the street over here and the rule changes completely, because then what's the point of going out? I do think there's a space for it. I wonder how we make that work in our current system the most.
And you know what? That's a great way to segue it over to David, or should I do it this way? To go to David, which is, so we're talking about decentralization, and we're the Green Party. Joe threw it out there. So let's kind of tackle it a little bit. He's like, I'm not sure how the Green Party would incorporate or how we would deal with decentralization. So knowing what you know about the Green Party, David, what do you feel? And again, we don't know if it's going to be like this, but just for the sake of conversation, what does it look like to you from a Green Party standpoint? How do we handle it in a way? Because as Christian is throwing out there, it's really all about equality and trying to level the playing field and balance things. But you don't want for any group to have too much power. But how do you know who should have the right amount of power? What is the right amount of power? Things like that. So since you are Mr. Morality, we're going to throw those questions about what's right to you.
All right. I think Joe made a good point that it's a discussion that people in the Green Party need to have more often. It is the fifth platform. So obviously whoever designed the Green Party in the first place thought it was important enough to make it in the top 10. So I think it's something that Green Party members should know about and should understand, and the multiple versions thereof. And I'm not saying that everybody in the Green Party needs to get together and decide on one version, because I'm wondering how many of these versions actually can be overlapped, just at least in theory. I think, though, as more to the point of being a Green Party member and advocating for decentralization, I think what might actually unify everybody on that, or at least most people, as Green Party members, is focusing on things like agriculture and the climate, soil, forests, the oceans. And if you focus on these things, nature has a tendency to bring out the unifying principles. I mean, that's how nature gets along, is by all these unifying laws and that kind of thing. And I think as Green Party members, if you focus on these sorts of things, you're going to find a lot more camaraderie, because everybody needs all those things. So it's true and proper and necessary for everybody, which is probably the elongated definition of unity and getting people on the same page. So yeah, I would say just focus on the green stuff concerning the Green movement and the Green New Deal and agriculture and such, and that would probably get people very far along in the dialogue.
That's awesome. That's an awesome way to look at it. One of the things that my personal belief is that we have more things that unites us than that separates us, but we simply choose to focus more on what divides us. And so, like, I think that was a great point that you brought out. If we can just use this concept as it pertains to all things green, right? So, like, not saying that those are the only things that exist, but if we use this to unite or use this concept for all things green, then that's definitely a way that we could, as you say, kind of come together in figuring out how to make decentralization a green issue. Joe, what do you have to say about that? Because we know you love this topic, so we want to get you included in the conversation as much as possible.
Yeah, well, what David said about, kind of to paraphrase, how nature makes its own law, and why not just use that? Like, we have social morality as the law. Why not just use those and kind of try to replace politics, maybe even replace law and voting as much as possible? And one thing I mentioned earlier is bioregionalism. And that segues perfectly into how we need to focus on environmental issues. And for environmental issues, for me, that relates to health, energy, ecology, land management, stuff that the Department of Interior is doing. So environment and the commons is one big topic. Now imagine if we could put all that into the hands of the local governments. It's like, the Greens, I'm sure they want to centralize a little bit first on the environmental issue to, make sure that the EPA has enough power and it's not toothless like it is now. But that's only to decentralize it. It's only in order to decentralize it to the local regions so that they can manage their land where they are, instead of having the federal government waste a bunch of energy and transportation costs getting there to do it themselves. And that's why bioregionalism is really important to me, because right now there's a lot of competition and conflict, including, terrorism, environmental terrorism, as they call it, happening over water resources. And if we just stopped drawing borders along rivers and started drawing them on mountain ranges where, nature already created these mountain ranges, you can usually see the enemy coming over the hill a lot easier than, so human civilizations were created, they started in river valleys. So why not just have the river valley be the basic unit of civilization? right now in North America, there's about 20 different bioregions. And if you look up a map of North America bioregions or North America watersheds, you'll see where the water drains to. And if we could just have each of those bioregions be its own country, then I think people's knowledge and awareness of the environmental factors that control their everyday life and their health and what they should eat, I think that would really inform what kind of other laws they should have. And then once we get environmental issues, once we have the local governments exercising environmental powers, then the central government is freed up to do everything that's not an environmental issue. So there will be less stepping on each other's toes. And I just want to add before we move on to other topics, I think it's, libertarians tend to talk about decentralization in a really political and legal way. But for Greens, it's going to be easier to understand on an environmental sense and an economic sense and production by cooperatives.
No, we're not going to move on yet because you brought that out really well. Christian, why don't you jump on to how, because I love how practical it is. And this is one of the things I think we talked about, if not last week, week before, where when we have a lot of these big words or terms or concepts, it is so important to break them down to the most practical sense where everybody can understand them, right? Like even when David was breaking down the concepts of morality, because everybody isn't on the same level, so some people may have started in college, some in high school, some this is their first time hearing any of this. So Joe, I really love how you broke it down to such a practical daily level. Like this is how we can incorporate it. Go ahead, Christian, and you kind of touch on that.
I guess from my standpoint, what came to mind for me when you guys were speaking was how do you get people on board with it? How do you get people to really follow along? Because everyone, as we know, like Toneal, you have a different ideology than I do. Dave, you have a different ideology. Joe, same thing. We all have different ideologies. I mean, yes, we're all Green Party members, but we all have a different view of what decentralization looks like in this specific case. But we also, down to like our core beliefs, have different values that we believe in. So how do we get people to get on board? You could talk to any of your coworkers at work and they would have a different view than you, and I think that's kind of what came to mind is where do we go with this? How do we get people to fall in line, or not even fall in line, but how do we get people to see? And then Joe, to a great point, just down to just a basic level, here's where you get your water. You should probably take care of that water and not throw trash in it. That'd be swell. That'd be real cool. If people can actually visually see this, they would say, "Oh, well, that's probably pretty smart. I shouldn't throw my trash on the ground. I should put it in a receptacle, or I should recycle, or I shouldn't." I really do like Joe's point there with breaking it down to that level so people can see. But then we also, as Toneal, you pointed out earlier, seeing isn't necessarily believing, because you can show somebody the light, but that doesn't mean they're gonna, we have a lot of alternate facts out in the world, which is a huge problem, which Joe touched on with the printing press. But people are so keen to believe whatever fits their bill or whatever they believe in that they're willing to believe alternate facts or things that just flat out aren't true. So even if you show somebody water, or you show somebody this is where you get your water, or this is where you get your food, this is where you get the air you breathe, they might say, well, I don't believe in air, or something ridiculous, so
I don't believe in air.
Yeah, exactly. I breathe something else, not air, I promise.
Funny, that was good.
So that kind of stuff is just, I love the idea of it. I love what you touched on, Joe, about just really breaking it down. That tends to open a lot of people's eyes, but there's always the people that don't want to follow it and say, well, no, that's wrong. That's not what I believe. I'm smarter, and then, if you ever try and reason with somebody, to Dave's points earlier, some people just, you can't. It's like talking to a brick wall. I got a coworker of mine, unfortunately, is just that kind of guy where it's like, oh, he thinks everyone's going to take his guns, and he's never going to have his guns because Joe Biden's going to take them all. And that's all fear mongering, and the printing presses and the news now is kind of that. So there's just people that won't see the light, and kind of really, even if you break it down to that level, won't see it. So how do we get those people, those really just down home, I'm not going to believe a word you say? How do we get those people to see water? This is where I drink my water from. I should probably not litter in that, kind of deal.
No, that's actually a great question. And it ties into what I was going to ask David. So keep all of that in mind, David, because that's really what we're doing. So taking Joe's point, but then also the question that Christian posed earlier, which is how do we go back to the right? How do we appoint who is the right one to listen to, right? Like, so I love how Joe broke it down to that basic point of, hey, this is your water, this is what you need to drink, so this needs to stay clear and clean. But what if you have some people disagree on the level of clean, well, because it doesn't have to be crystal clean, it can be this clean. So then, it breaks down into, well, I want to listen to the person who says that it can be 5% residue, but this one is 10. So how do we figure out who the right person is? So in conjunction with what David said, and then adding on to that question, David, listen to what Joe said, and then adding on to that point. Go ahead and address that.
Well, I think the general answer is, the most basic, simple answer is education, is that you just teach these people how to think about specific issues. We have science, again, we have math, we have logic, we have history with law, we have history. I mean, who are you going to ask about history? Who's the most credible source? An historian. So when it comes to that, you ask them. If you want to know something about the biodynamics or bioregions and stuff like that, who are you going to ask? Well, you're going to start probably with a geographer, or geologist. You might go on to somebody else who surveys land and that kind of thing, who understands. So the experts are in every field. You want to know more about medicine? Ask a doctor. That kind of thing. And I think just, putting these things and the facts, the truths thereof in these respective areas into an educational curriculum for people to start learning at an even younger level makes for better people in the future and more educated. And so you're going to look, I studied philosophy. You think all philosophers agree? Of course not. But you're talking about very minor variations in the bigger issues, very minor amount of variations. I don't know any philosopher who thinks that Nazism's okay. That kind of thing, so, or ethicists for that matter. So you're going to find some variations that people are going to disagree, but that's okay. That's what dialogue and discourse is for. But I think the general answer is education. Is you get the expert data, the information into the school curriculums at a younger age, so that people grow up knowing how to think better, and so that they can actually negotiate with one another on important issues. And you're always not going to find the people coming together. But again, I think that you'll find enough similarities where the differences are minute, and who cares? But yeah, education.
Okay, so let me play devil's advocate really quickly. So in Joe's previous example that, I found hilarious, but where, okay, everywhere you go, and maybe we don't mean breaking up one city, but, it's laws here for this county or even this state, is these laws are different, these laws are different, right? Now you're saying, hey, there's not really a huge way that we can disagree about main concepts. But here is my question, so say one area values this, one area values air, one area values water, right? So obviously we know that they're both important, but what happens if you have different people that put different levels of importance on the preservation of those things? Then I think that's where you get to the question of, who do you listen to? Whose opinion do you value? Does that make sense, what I'm saying? So, Joe, how would you tackle that situation?
Unfortunately, this requires a little bit of criticism of democracy and a little bit of admission that democracy and voting and politics and law aren't all the solution to our problems and don't always work. Because it's yeah, obviously, when you're figuring out environmental law, you want to trust the experts. It's like people say 99% of climate scientists believe in global warming. It's well, the 99%, it's not like they took a vote. It's just that they happen to agree. So what matters more is that there's widespread agreement than whether there's a 50 or 60 or whatever supermajority. So to some things have to be depoliticized, and that's a way to decentralize things away from the DC and away from the central government very quickly. And in Britain, they've taken things like courts and justice, legal ethics, economics and finance, and environmental law, and a couple of different topics, and they've made those depoliticized. They've they've given them over to independent agencies. Now, in America, that would usually risk corporate corruption, but like if it could be done the right way, there is a way to protect certain, fields of law from, meddling by democracies in a way that could, put our health at risk or put our legal justice. We have to make sure to give people trials, and an important part of local government is that we have the trials close to where the crime occurred, and that's like a fundamental American issue, but it's also a very decentralized issue.
No, that's awesome what you said in terms of breaking it down to giving people the power. Because in a way, Christian, I want you to kind of touch on it because you've touched on it all night. That's really kind of what the Green Party does, right? Or at least that's the belief that everybody is equal. So how do you feel like, taking what Joe said, and if we were to depoliticize that, what would that look like from a Green perspective?
The way if I'm like head of the Green Party right now and I'm saying, yeah, I'm going to make one decree as to how we should believe that this goes down, which is obviously not the case. I'm just going to throw that out there for everyone.
Put it out there.
I'm not the guy. I'm not the top guy here. I'm just a random guy on a talk here. The way I would do it is listen. So, I mean, if we talk about like experts in any field, we talk about scientists, we talk about land surveyors, geographists, just any expert in any field should have there should be a group of those experts. So say like you got 10 scientists to tell you, well, this is how we should treat our land, or 10 surveyors to tell us how to treat our land. Those 10 surveyors should get together, come collectively to make what they think would be a good policy to make sure our land is clean, or our water is clean, or what have you. And then, so all these little groups of people, I guess is my point, would in turn work together to form a single solid opinion of what should be done. That way you have somebody that's on the top of like, oh, we need to do something about climate change yesterday. And then we also have somebody that says like, oh, we still got 10 years, right? So then you kind of have a basis for like, you have somebody that's like, we got to do it now. Somebody, we got to do it 10 years. You have a spectrum. We have a spectrum of people, so that all beliefs within the system of, say, climate change can be heard. And then they can all work together to come to a single arrangement that they can then tell the people, like, hey, this is what we should be doing. We talk to people that don't really care so like think climate change is 10 years down the road. We talk to people that, thought climate change was really right now or even yesterday. And we came to a single agreement. The day we can start doing that in all fields, using experts, using science, using data, using math, like Dave said, that would be the day that we can really decentralize in terms of giving everybody the choice, giving everybody the chance, giving everybody a say. You could even break that down to religion. Like if you wanted people that believe in Catholicism, or people that believe in Christianity, or people that believe in Buddhism, or people that believe in Taoism, or any of the thousands of religions that might be out there, have them all come together and say, look, we're going to settle our differences. We're not going to really say your religion's right, my religion's right, but we're going to do something that works for all people of all religions. And then kind of just say that, like, hey, yeah, you have freedom of religion in this country, but our guideline or our theory suggests that you should also care about other people. Catholicism and Christianity, they don't say, yeah, go, don't like that person. Don't, it's all about you. All the religions actually do that. So, I mean, if you could have like I guess in the religion theory here, if you could, get everyone to just kind of like come together, and, a Buddhist monk and a Christian pastor and, you could get them all to come together. And say, I mean, you probably wouldn't, but anyway, you could, and you would get a more balanced and more equal approach. And I think that really, to me, is what speaks to decentralization as it is, having an equal amount of expert advice, of, religious leaders, of just kind of that. And if everyone works together in their own separate areas of expertise, we can really come to an equal and good, I don't really know what the word is for it. Good solution, I guess.
Solution. Yeah. Resolve.
Yeah.
So here's the question to you, David, because I'm hearing what Christian is saying. And my again, I'm still playing devil's advocate here. So we're already established as a society. People already have their ideologies. They already have their beliefs that they hold fast to. They already have their opinions. So is it even possible to transition to that mindset of, well, let us just bring all of the experts together? Because depending on where you are, everybody feels they're an expert. So who decides who the appointed experts to listen to would be? Like, what is the criteria? So is it if you have 1 degree or 2 degrees, if you have 5 years experience or 15 years, like what is the criteria to then determine who are the experts that should be listened to, so that we can determine what the right thing to do for our country, our world would be? David.
Well, the experts that have come before the future experts would be the people who appoint present people as future experts, meaning you have peer review in all the different respective sciences. So a biologist comes up with a theory and he publishes it. Then 100,000 other biologists just swarm on it and either say good to go, or there's this problem, this problem, this problem, or the whole thing's nonsense. It's really one of those 3 answers, I guess. And then you go from there. So it's a problem. Look, I don't expect any of this to happen tomorrow. Right. But I mean, I think the people who appoint experts as experts are the experts that came before them. And I just recently dealt with somebody, and I'll keep this brief and mild, but who really just thinks that he knows more than he does. And he's kind of called himself an expert on human nature. I'm like, oh, really? I'm like, so who are you studying? Because that's the biggie. I'm like, who are you studying? It turned out to be a bunch of like pop psychology. I'm like, does anybody else think that you're an expert on human nature? Well, no. I'm like, you don't get to just call yourself an expert. It means you passed a series of tests and proving yourself to be one. An expert is a tier of excellence in understanding whatever. So yeah, I mean, there's plenty. All these fields are already established. You know, the sciences, the mathematics, everything, the philosophy, the ethics, everything. I mean, there's already a ton of literature out there that's been going on for thousands of years. You know, it's not like we're starting blind. So the people who are experts now in their fields will appoint the present up and comers to be experts in the future, and that's how you determine what an expert is. And I understand what you're saying, Toneal. Is like, you know, well, everybody thinks they know more than they do, or everybody thinks they're an expert. You know, being a bartender, you know, I'm so glad I'm not going to bartend anymore. So I keep thinking about these people, and I just like have these memories, and I'm like, oh my god, that person was so annoying. You know, and because they just shoot their mouths off, and I'm like, everything you just said was wrong. You know, because I spend time researching. I know how to do research. I mean, as a bartender, you can't always say that. Sometimes I just had it and I would, but the only answer I have is, you know, you can't force people to do it. You can only hope that they'll want to educate themselves properly. And that's how I go back to education as being the general and most simple solution to all of it. So yeah, academics is what's going to tell you, you know, who the better people are, the academic people and the experts in the respective fields.
Well, you know what? Thank you so much for that, David. And I'm hoping, y'all, believe it or not, we are at the end of the hour again.
I know.
This time, I'm right. This time goes by so quickly. But I want to first acknowledge all of those who tuned in today. Thank you guys so much, to Pastor Sandy, to Mary, to Molly, and anybody else who may have been tuned in that didn't type into the comment section. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Again, you have joined a lively discussion from the Green Party members. We've been discussing decentralization, and this was week 5. And so if you were interested, intrigued by this conversation, and you want to know more about the Green Party, then we invite you to go to the website, www.ilgp.org, to get more information. And then, in fact, on next week, week 6, we are going to be talking about community-based economics. That's probably one of my, you know, that's near and dear for me. But we're never sure who's going to join us. We never sure who'll be here next week. So you guys always have to tune in so that way you can see who the panelists will be. But what I want to do is definitely thank Joe, to Christian, to David. Thank you guys for your time and coming back in. But I want to yield the floor. If you all have, we can give you guys each a minute for any final remarks that you would like to make for today. And let's start with Joe.
Sure. So David was talking about, experts, and I think we want to make sure that we trust experts on environmental issues and scientific issues, but there's also a legal, ethical aspect to it. Anything that happens, anything there's a controversy about, it has to stand up to scientific and legal scrutiny. There was a guy in Sweden who went to America, and he said these traffic lights, like they're obviously rigged to catch people, and the courts just threw it out. They said, you are not an expert on physics like you claim you are, because Sweden doesn't have a developed physics licensing system. Well, it's like, maybe the government's corrupt and maybe shouldn't be determining all of our standards. And so we have moral standards, ethical, industrial, technical standards, and there's ways to develop standards outside of government. And, to segue into the community-based economics, I just want to name a few technologies that I think you can look it up, things that can help decentralize wealth and production. 3D printers, having your own solar panels to collect energy, planting food at home, starting farming and gardening, maybe even have a goat, as people are trying in Chicago. You start a cooperative, try to have that cooperative be as self-governing as possible, give a high degree of autonomy to the workers within it. And, as David mentioned, peer review in science. It's also peer-to-peer sharing. That's how the internet was created. So, Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much, Joe. Christian, come on, what's your final? Give us some last remarks.
Well, I will say again, thank you for having me as well. Second week in a row, and I still love it. Still think it's great. Still think it's fun to have conversations with you guys. So who knows? Maybe I'll be back soon. A decentralization, as far as it goes, I really think is entirely possible. Maybe not currently with the system that we do have, and especially in America, with the two-party. It's only the two parties. You can't choose any other party kind of deal we have going on here. And even those two parties don't agree on anything. So it's really, nothing's getting done. Decentralization as a whole, though, is a very interesting topic. I love the idea of spreading the wealth. I love the idea of listening to science, listening to doctors, listening to people that actually know what they're talking about. That would be fantastic. So I do think we have a spot for it. We just need to work towards that spot, as Dave touched on with education is his big thing. Absolutely, that would be fantastic to educate people past what they watch on Fox News or whatever other garbage they might pick up off the TV. I really think that's it. Decentralization, spreading the wealth, loving to just kind of have everybody have a say and have that really level the playing field in that way.
Awesome. David, what's your word?
All right, I'll try to keep it brief. But one thing I want to say before I finish is we talked a lot about the pros of decentralization, but I don't think we touched enough about like the dangers of centralization. So I want to bring just one recent example. Last year with the coronavirus, the federal government utterly failed at everything it was doing in the beginning, right? Because nobody could get organized enough to figure out what was going on. The FDA, made a non-elected body of people, by the way, made it illegal for anybody to buy testing except for from the CDC. The CDC's tests at the time were completely insufficient and ineffective. It took them over 6 weeks before anybody could get a test from the CDC to test to see who was positive, who was not. At the same time, South Korea and Germany were nailing it when it came to testing. You're going to tell me that a local doctor, a local hospital can't like just go, okay, we'll just get ours from Germany. The centralized power said, no, you can't do that. Why? Because of the decentralized power. That's it. It has to go to them because they say so. Anyway, I look forward to next week. So decentralization and community-based economics have a lot to do with each other, of course. Decentralization leads to community-based economics. And I'm very much looking forward to it. I love being here. That's that. Joe, it's good to have you here, by the way.
Thank you.
Well, I enjoy having all of you guys on. We can have get the whole Brady Bunch thing for real going on. Let's get like 9 folks, and then we just really really trying to figure out that Brady Bunch thing. But in either case, thanks to all of my fellow panelists, Green Party members, Joe, Christian, David, thank you guys so much for coming on and making this as lively as it is. Because again, at the end of the day, as David keeps saying, it's all about education. And so at its core, what we really want to do is educate those of you who decide to tune in, whether live or on the replay. Number one, not just about the issues, but about the Green Party. Many times people, they're still under the belief that there are only two parties out there. Just because you hear more about the major parties, you hear about Democrats and Republicans, but there are other parties such as the Green Party who could really use your help, and we would appreciate you. And so we're asking that you go ahead, and if you're loving what you hear, to join us. Anna, who is our state party organizer, she is doing a phenomenal job behind the scenes, keeping us together. And she's just put up there again the website, www.ilgp.org, or you can send any questions to info@ilgp.org. But I thank you guys for tuning in. And again, next week, we will be in week 6 talking about community-based economics. I have been your host, Toneal Jackson, and I hope that you all decide to tune in and join us on next week. If you like this episode, then we ask that you like and share it and tag somebody that you believe would benefit from watching the broadcast. Thank you guys so much, and until next time, you all stay inspired.
Thank you.
Thanks.